Howdy, hello, hola, hi. This is Lumbradita Talks, and my name is Laura. You can also call me Lala. And in this video, I'm doing part four of my mini series called Lo que se ve no se pregunta. I'm sharing my coming out story. And so, just kind of to recap where I left off, in part three, I shared how I came out when I was 33 years old after having like a mental health crisis, and then how I experienced being in my first queer relationship at the age of 35. That was a very intense and short lived relationship, but significant nonetheless. And that leaves us at the beginning of 2020. After that relationship ended and I worked through processing what happened in that relationship, I spent a lot of time in the gym. I spent a lot of time in therapy and just focusing on myself. I wasn't interested in jumping into another relationship or even considering it. And then the pandemic started. And so I went from being at the gym to working out from home and going on long walks with my doggy Sasha to then going to virtual therapy. And by the end of 2020, it took some time. I was in a much better place. And I decided to give myself the opportunity for a fresh start away from El Paso. And I pursued a school leadership role. So at the beginning of 2021, I moved away from El Paso and I gave myself a fresh start. And at that point, my brother asked me, at some point in that spring, he asked me, one of my brothers asked me, have you considered getting on a dating app? And I was like, no, I've never done that. And he encouraged me to try out Bumble. Mind you, I was still continuing therapy. I was in therapy before that relationship, while I was in that relationship, and after. And one of the things that we talked about in therapy was me not focusing on what I don't want and focusing more on what I do want and how I'm willing to show up. I think it's a part of manifesting, like declaring what you want and putting it out there in the universe. So she encouraged me to think about how am I willing to show up in this relationship if I do pursue one? What kind of qualities am I looking for in this person? What type of relationship am I hoping to have? Those types of things. So I said I was willing to show up as a person who's very expressive, communicative, affectionate, a person who is caring, person who's considerate, and a person who is continuously working on herself. Like, I'm going to continue working on myself and on my own self development. And what I was looking for in a partner was somebody who had the capacity to communicate in a healthy way, somebody who was caring, somebody who was affectionate, somebody who I can have fun with and feel safe with, you know? And so I did end up getting on that app in the spring of 2021, and that's how I ended up meeting the person who I ended up being in a relationship with for almost 3 years. This is not a happily ever after. Um, it's not a sadly ever after either, but the relationship did end in 2024, and it's been about 2 years now since that relationship ended. And I would say that's been probably been the no, not probably. It is the greatest heartbreak I've ever experienced in a romantic relationship. And even though it's been 2 years, I still am processing internally through that. I think the biggest thing that I feel is grief that relationship ended, and I can talk a lot about it still to this day. Um, there's a couple of layers to that grief. The first layer that I can think of is just grieving that imagined future that this person and I had talked about, that we were figuring out. I'm grieving the fact that this person's not in my life anymore. I'm grieving that I did not get enough time or did not get more time to show this person and to express to them how much I love them and how much they mean to me. There is grief that comes with that loss of time, not feeling like I did not have more time to do that. I think it's still a very complicated thing for me internally, but that being said, I have moved forward with my life in the sense that my life looks so different than it did 2 years ago in all aspects. I'm not dating or considering dating. I want to be clear. When I say I have moved forward with my life, is it has not, my life hasn't fallen apart. And it's not something that I'm saying like as a flex or anything like that, but it's just one of those things that like the only way for me is forward, even if I'm heartbroken, even if I'm grieving. Um, the only way is forward, and so my life looks very different than it did 2 years ago in all aspects. The only thing that is the same technically is that I still have my baby dog who ended up staying with me. Um, my baby dog Sushi, and the fact that I live in El Paso. Um, I just want to put it out there. I don't want to live in El Paso indefinitely. I have stayed in El Paso these past 2 years out of necessity, and I'm on my way out. I not only am I on my way out of El Paso, but I really hope to leave Texas. That's my plan and that's my intention. Um, but it's a process to figure that out right now with my employment. But yes, going back to what I was talking about with this relationship, why am I sharing all of these details about this relationship and the level of heartbreak that I feel? Well, because it's me sharing my story, right? And sharing my journey. Like, right when around the time, right before I turned 40 years old, is when I experienced my greatest heartbreak that I've ever experienced. And it was in a queer relationship. It's been less than 10 years since I came out. And it's kind of, how do I say this? It might not make sense to a lot of people. But to me, it's one of those things that, like, I think the biggest thing that I want to share about this is that when I gave myself permission to be who I truly am as a queer person, as a queer woman, I gave myself the space to consider the possibility of being in a relationship, a romantic relationship. And because I did that, I was able to experience loving somebody and caring for somebody in a way that I never had before. I didn't know that I had it in me to care for someone and love someone the way that I did because I came out. If I had not come out, that level of insight into myself and my capacity, I would not have ever realized that. And so for that, I am grateful, even though I'm still grieving and I still feel heartbroken. One thing that I do also want to name is that because I came out later in life, my development and my experience with romantic relationships that came till much later. And I still would say that I feel very inexperienced in navigating that with that added layer that I've been an educator now for 20 years. Like, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge this because it is a part of my coming out, right? Like I mentioned, being in survival mode through all of my 20s, and I would even argue my 30s, did not give me the space for me to really sit with myself and to gain that insight and that awareness of myself that I was a queer person. And even after I came out, it still took time for me to even give myself permission or to consider the possibility of being in a romantic relationship. And so, because I never got that experience at a younger age that I saw most of the people my age going through, I never learned how to balance being in a romantic relationship while being an educator and still being able to take care of myself. That is still something that, like, I'm figuring out. Even just me having a separate identity outside of work, that has been a very recent thing for me in the past couple of years where I've learned how to separate my identity and sense of who I am from what I do professionally. And so then you add a relationship to that equation. And I will say that, like, there was a lot of lessons that I learned through that. And it is something that I am very sorry for. It is something that I had to work through those feelings of shame over and that remorse and even that guilt. Like, this idea that, like, my work got the best of me and that the person who mattered the most to me got the rest of me. Like, that is something that I've had to hold myself accountable for. And it is something that I have had to work on and I'm still working on forgiving myself for, if I'll be honest. Even though that's not the sole factor for why that relationship did not work, it was a contributing factor. And that's on me, right? I do have to give myself grace, but there's that fine line between giving yourself grace and then letting yourself off the hook. And it is something that I feel very sorry for. It is something that I wish I was better equipped for. But I also acknowledge what led to that, what contributed to that. And me not learning how to balance work versus personal life, me being a late diagnosed autistic person and not getting my needs, my support needs addressed at a much younger age, and me navigating being an educator in the middle. It was just so many different things contributed to that, and I can recognize it. But at the same time, I have to hold myself accountable. And like, it is something that I feel very sorry for, and I try to not like get my down on myself over. But I will say that like, because of this heartbreak and because of this grief over the past 2 years, I have never cried as much as I have over these past 2 years. Like, this like guttural cry. Like, I didn't even know I could cry like that. Um, so much so that I feel like I've actually damaged my vocal cords. And the way that I figure that out is because like I'm a person that enjoys singing at home or in my car. And at some point when I would try to sing, and still to this day when I try to sing songs that I've always sung, for a very long time, my voice cracks now. And I do believe that's a direct result of the crying, like that guttural cry, like the pain that I was working through emotionally. And like, that's just me being very vulnerable and sharing that. Now, all that is set aside, like, I'm very much in this point in my life, like I said, where I have moved forward. I'm now taking care of myself and working through my health. I'm watering my own garden, if you want to call it that. I'm making art. I'm alchemizing that grief into my art, into my pottery. And I'm making plans on my exit from El Paso and eventually Texas. And I know that's going to take time. But I want to share some reflections. I want to share some reflections that I have um overall just about the journey of my coming out, aside from wherever this last chapter was of my last relationship. Part of my journey now is trying to figure out how where I belong within the queer community, because I did come out later in life. My queerness is not the most important part of my identity, um or what I center my existence on. Like, yes, I'm a queer woman, but that's not what my existence is centered on, if that makes sense. And not to mention, aside from that, any representation that I saw of queerness for a significant part of my life was white queerness, because that's what's displayed or portrayed in the media, if ever. Um, Same thing with social media. I don't know. Like, it just, white queerness does not resonate with me. And so, because of that, because that was the predominant voice that was being amplified, I guess, that also kind of led to me feeling like a separation and not being able to connect. It wasn't until I started meeting queer people of color right around the time that I came out that I felt like, oh, this resonates with me. I connect. I feel seen and I feel safe in this space. And I do believe that that contributed a lot to me coming out later in life. While I was around queer people of color, like for example in high school. Unfortunately, in that particular situation, I was bullied. And so again, there was almost like this like separation because of that. The queer boys that bullied me in high school, um, because I felt disconnected and ostracized, I kind of just didn't feel like I felt safe there. And so that added on another layer to it. Now, I will say that, like, I hear people now saying things like, well, back in the day, it was harder, or now people are more accepting. With this, I believe multiple truths can exist at once. Yes, absolutely. Back in the day was harder. There's no denying that. But this whole idea of like people are more accepting now, I struggle with that. Um I struggle with that because when I hear that from people, it's usually because they have insulated themselves in environments where they feel more safe to be who they are. I feel like those places where you can insulate yourself to the point where you think that, those places are the exception. Texas is a prime example of that. You can insulate yourself in Austin and think, oh, yeah, people are more accepting now. But then if you go to Odessa, which is like West Texas, 4 hours away from El Paso, absolutely not. And so I would argue that it's not necessarily that people are more accepting now, is that there's only certain spaces now where people can insulate themselves to think that people are more accepting now. I'm going to just name it. I don't feel like I am safe everywhere that I go and that people are automatically going to accept me. I don't go around waving my rainbow flag, but I think people generally, when I walk in, might assume that I'm a queer woman. And I don't automatically assume that people are going to accept me as I am. And as a result of that, I don't feel safe everywhere that I go. Not to mention, gay marriage was legalized 11 years ago. Like, gay marriage was legalized, and then I came out 2 years after that. Like, and now in the current context that we live in, our rights are now in question again. Our protections in the workplace, our human rights, access to healthcare, all of those things are in question. So I just wanted to put that out there. Um, like speaking of workplace, just 3 years ago, I was outed in the workplace, and I felt unsafe because of that. Um, because it was very clear to me that with people's actions and with people's behavior, that there was almost this like, kind of like, I don't know how else to explain it, but I just want to put this out there, just as a side note or as a PSA. Just because you are a woman and I'm a queer woman does not mean that I look at you that way and does not mean that I'm interested. You would think that's common sense, but maybe it's that compulsive heterosexuality and this understanding or this idea that people have of, let's say, men, that men are predatory, that they automatically assume that because I'm a queer woman who has uh who has dated women before, who thinks that now queer women operate under that. Like, no, like that to me has been very puzzling. And so when I say that, like, I was outed in the workplace, and I have worked in a school network that is notoriously homophobic, where you are discouraged for coming out still in 2026. That is still very much a real thing. And so that has added to my feelings of not being safe. The fact that this person thought it was okay to out me, and then as a result, I saw a shift in dynamics in the workplace that weren't as blatant, but were very clear to me. I will say that if I go into public spaces to this day, like a gas station or the gym or a parking lot or grocery stores, like, I do look over my shoulder. I do scan the room to see who's there. Um, just not only because of the fact that I'm a woman, but also because, again, I don't want to assume that people see me that way, but I've been told, lo que se ve no se pregunta. Like, you could tell that you're a queer woman when you walk through the door. Okay. Well, I'm not waving a rainbow flag. And if people think I'm a queer woman because I have a shaved head, then, well, that's not on me. But I guess the essence of who I am conveys queerness. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But I will say that there have been places that I walked into and I've taken a look at the whole situation and I've walked out. There have been gas stations that I've pulled up to where there has been clear MAGA representation there. And I've driven off because I know that I'm not safe there. Um, so it's Pride Month. I have gone to a Pride event once, and that was in 2019. It's not something that I do yearly. I don't really know how to interact or engage in those spaces. I don't know if that's a Laura thing. I don't know if that's an autistic thing. I don't know what it is, but I just haven't at this point found where I belong within that space and what my purpose is for being there. Um, that's something that I'm still working through. And when I hear people say that you should be out and proud, I'm not really sure what that means either. Like, this whole idea of like, are you proud of being queer? I don't know. Like, do the straights get asked that question? And I'm really genuinely like, help me understand this. Like, do the straights say, I'm proud to be straight? I have not encountered that. So for me to say that I'm proud to be queer, like, I still don't. It's something that I'm still trying to make sense of and trying to understand what that means. But like, if you were to ask me that question today, are you proud to be queer or what does pride mean to you? What I would say is I have given myself permission to show up as who I am. I have given myself permission to be a queer woman in this world. And because I have given myself permission to do that in places where I feel safe, I have now learned that I have the capacity to love in a way that I didn't know I could. Prior to coming out, what I thought love was and the depth of that emotion and the capacity that I had to give that, I did not know that I had it in me until I came out as a queer woman. I didn't know that I was affectionate in the way that I am or that I'm loving in the way that I am until I gave myself permission to be a queer woman. And that's what pride means to me. Giving myself to be who I truly am so that I can love fully in a way that I couldn't have before. And that might sound deep to somebody, but that's my truth. That's what it means to me, you know? And for anybody who's the least receptive, I don't have to be waving a flag for me to show that I'm queer. I think the essence of who I am um, conveys that I'm a queer woman. I don't know. I'm still making sense of that. But what I do know is that I don't feel the need now to come out. Porque lo que se ve no se pregunta. And so I really just want to say thank you for those of you that have engaged with this mini series. There is no happily ever after here. It's not a sadly ever after either. This is just painting a very realistic picture of somebody who came out later in life who is still figuring it out, but truly just embracing and giving myself permission to figure it out still. And also understanding that a part of my journey is recognizing that giving myself that permission to be a queer woman has led to this expansion into this and this growth that I didn't know was possible. Oh boy. So I believe it is officially the start of Mercury being in retrograde. And I realized as I was editing this that parts of the video are like flashing and intermittently. And the last part of this video, this recording, that is over 20 minutes long, was flashing a lot. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because there you go. I don't know if it's because I recorded this at night and the light sources in here are different, but I want to keep it brief and in hopes that this comes out better. In the month of July, I'm not going to be posting a mini series. I'm giving myself the freedom to journal on some thoughts and then plugging in the mic, hitting record. I will continue posting on Mondays. I do want to add in a segment, 2 segments to my podcast. One of them being That Resonates, and then the other one being Help Me Understand. And I'll say more about that in the month of July, but I am going to be adding those segments because I personally find it amusing. um, I appreciate the folks who have engaged with this content through the month of June. I have made it a point to not broadcast it to friends or family per se, because truthfully, I'm not seeking external validation or permission from them on posting this. My intention is one, to share my story and share my journey in hopes that other folks who might resonate with feel seen, or they can connect with it or relate to it. And then for those who don't, for them to gain a new insight on experiences that they might not have known about otherwise, right? It's also a form of creativity for me. I love writing. I love editing, even with the little bit of software that I have on my laptop. I don't have Adobe or anything fancy like that because that's just not in the budget. Maybe down the line it'll be in the budget. But it's a form of creativity for me, and also just digging through my archive of photographs. I have documented a lot of my life through photographs, which looking back, that's actually a something that I love about my journey, that I have always been a person that likes to capture moments through photographs. But yes, this is a form of creativity for me, and I'm trusting that like whoever comes across this on their algorithm, that it'll be for a reason. But at the very least, again, it's just an outlet for me. It's a form of creativity, and I'm grateful that I get to even just try this out. I had joked around for a while that I wanted to get a mic, and I got one, and I just find it so amusing that I have one. I mean, I had one at the radio station when I was a DJ. Like they had one there, so it's not the first time that I ever speak into a mic per se, but it's pretty interesting to see myself in this way. And yeah, thank you for hearing me out. I will continue posting on Mondays. See you soon.